What is up, my fellow degenerates? It's your boy with yet another name change, this time the one that abbreviates to RF, and I'm back to playing League of Legends and playing Nidalee top lane. Playing Nidalee reminds me of my previous relationships, way too much effort for very little reward, but we just keep coming back, don't we? Somehow, regardless of being washed up, I was able to get Masters and going strong on Grandmasters. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if I was able to get Challenger before preseason ends. By no means am I recommending you that you play this in solo queue, because frankly, this champion's quite bad, and that probably has something to do with Riot thinking that it's a jungler, because, well, in the lore it's a jungler. Anyways, if you want to learn Nidalee top lane, be prepared to put in a lot of effort for something that's not really rewarding to play. However, it is a mechanically intensive champion, so it is quite satisfying to, press a lot of buttons and shit. There's a lot of situational things, and I probably can't put them all in the video, so if you're ever confused about how to play a specific matchup or what to do in a certain situation, just ask me on stream or something. So, first thing, you need to know how to stutter step. This is like the most basic League of Legends mechanic. I prefer to A-click for attacks and then right-click for movement, just so I can separate it in my brain. And then here's the few combos that you're gonna need to know. Nidalee is generally a pretty fluent champion to play, aside from Riot Games deciding to remove her auto-tech reset on her ulti, but we don't talk about that. Nidalee can actually proc all the sheet items if you auto-tech, then transform pounce, because the animation is fast enough, it goes off instantly. But the most important one being the QW, this is something that you're going to be using a lot against matchups that want to engage and go in on you. This is either for maximizing the amount of damage that you do while kiting away, or just having to get a W reset. Overall, it's pretty smooth. So just practice this while laning and you'll kind of get the grasp on when you need to do it. So here, as you can see, I'm doing it against Fiora in laning phase. Again, this is not something that's going to make or break your gameplay, but it's a really nice thing to know. For your runes, you're going to want to take Grasp, because even though you're playing a cat, your playstyle resembles more of a rat. Demolish is good for taking plates and capitalizing on an early lead. Boom plating goes well with short burst trades, and then Overgrowth or Revitalize. First being the default, but Revitalize is also good for hard lanes, where you need a lot more sustain. So things like Jace or Cannon. Second tree is situational. The default setup is Domination for sudden impact. It works really well since your pounce will give you Magic Pen and Lethality, and Nidalee deals hybrid damage, so it's double the benefit. Followed by Ravenous Hunter or Zombie Ward. I think Ghost Power is really broken, but I'm just really bad at them. Precision is really good because it gives you Legend Tenacity and Coup de Grace. Also, contrary to a popular belief, Tenacity does stack. Sorcery is good versus mages because of the Nullifying Orb, and I also really like the new Scorch. And then Inspiration is, well, Riot wasn't feeling really inspired by the free Jays and Rolling meta, so they stuck them in the same tree, and Corrupting Pot doesn't really fit Nidalee's build since your base damage gets defaulted to AP, meaning that you have to start Dawn's Blade in order to get that adaptive AD. So this tree kind of sucks, but if anything changes, I'll probably be the first one to use it. Last but not least, for your flat stats, you want to take attack speed and adaptive AD, and then armor and MAR depending on the matchup, obviously. At level 1, you want to set up bushwhacks for aggressive play. Basically, you just set them up kind of like this, same thing mirrored on the other side, but the goal is that you set them up in a way that will make your opponent walk into them at level 1 and just make sure that the creep wave is not toggled. These two bushwhacks are pretty useful once you get more into the laning phase. The first one being for the blast code and the second one being for try. Even if the place is warded, it's also nice to have the bushwhack there because sometimes the junglers will walk into it and they will think that you saw them on the bushwhack and not on the ward, so they will try to regank you again. Or, if you're getting camped, just do this or some shit. How Nidalee works in lane is you're going to want to push the lane in, and the first step to doing so is you want to create a disruptancy in the creep wave at level 1. This way you don't get to pick and choose between which CS to get, and this will also make sure that you get more opportunity to be able to play aggressively. So this is like a basic concept for playing any slow pushing early champion, especially for ranged top laners. But back to Nidalee, what you want to do is you want to proc your grasp autos while pushing the wave in. So there's two ways to do this. You can either walk in and outside of the bush and utilize the movement speed that you get from your passive, or you can just straight up auto attack and then pounce back inside of your wave. This might not seem like a lot, but if you play this properly, you can generate a pretty decent lead throughout the laning phase and transition that lead into later on laning phase where you can play around your power spikes. Nidalee spikes at levels 6, 11, and 16. And that's because your Cougar form abilities will gain levels based on your ultimate, not based on what you max. So as your first ability, you're just gonna max E. And maxing heal is really nice in lane because you can out-sustain majority of the champions, and it also goes hand in hand with proccing Grasp because you take short bursty trades, but you don't actually commit to the fight. Unless you're playing against something like Ryze, for example, or Vlad, and in that case you can just take Conquer and just all in them. Once you're around level 6 or so, you can actually start taking a lot more confident trades because your Cougar form gives you a lot of flat out base damage. And then what I like to do a lot is when the person engages out on me, I like to spear them in melee range and then trade back. So you just use it for the hunt proc, same thing as with Bushwhack. One of your weaknesses is getting all-in, so champions that can commit to fights are really strong. Things like Irelia, Riven, Fiora, basically things that have all-in potential. But it's very playable as long as you keep your range and you utilize what you're strong at, which is sustained damage. You can eventually whittle them down low enough that you can execute a dive. So because you're playing Nidalee, you'll probably get ganked a lot, and if you ever fall behind, you will probably lose the game. Right out of this Aklobi thing, or whatever the fuck it's called, but it doesn't actually help a lot, so you need to either communicate to your jungler, or you need to be careful whenever you get ganked. Because if you ever fall behind, the game is pretty much lost since you fall off really hard. And this works the same way as with a lot of harassed champions top lane. Things like Jace or Gnar, you just have to stay ahead of the curve in the game and scale with items. And just because you will be ahead in gold, you will keep growing more ahead in gold. And that's how you keep winning. But if you ever fall behind or go even, you pretty much lose. For builds, they obviously change quite a lot, and for the sake of this guide staying relevant, I recommend checking out my OPG or asking me on stream or something. But right now, the hot stuff is Dorn stack into Sheen or Tabby with the situational Merc Dreads or Negatron. Around mid-game, your build should look a lot like Ornn's, which is Gauntlet and Abyssal finished boots, followed by a bunch of situational items. I like going Warmogs if I'm really fed, or transition into AP with Laundries. Again, situational items like Thornmail, Maw, Renduins are all oriented for what you need, and they are game dependent. So you can even go as far as getting Ardent if you're inting and your ADCs popping off, might as well. Back to the gameplay, in mid-game, once you've taken the first tower, you should expand your lead by starting to take jungle and roaming to other lanes. So you just play with pressure. This is a standard thing to do whenever you're winning a lane on any champion, but Nidalee's pretty decent at this because she clears jungle camps relatively fast. Wonder why? Perhaps because she's actually a jungle champion. But back to the point, you want to get deeper vision control and just control a side of the map. And around this time, you'll probably end up getting ganked or collapsed on, so it's really important to be aware. But you don't necessarily have to stay in lane and try to beat your lane opponent. You can take your lane advantage to other lanes. So doing things like roaming to mid lane to take plates or to take the tower, or having to go to attempt to dragon, being ready for a teleport play, or stealing the enemy jungle are all good things to do. Around this time, Herald is also a nice objective. If you've taken the tower early enough, you can take Herald to another lane and take another tower, or even go as far as pushing out the tier 2 at top lane. Nidalee isn't completely useless in teamfights, but it's preferred that you don't teamfight and you focus on skirmishing. So playing around with your jungler and playing with your lane prio for taking smaller fights, the less people that are involved, the better it is, and trying to juice out advantages. What I find Nidalee useful at is playing with aggressive junglers, because she's really good at rotating and collapsing and kind of like picking people. So that's what you should be focusing on. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you're almost forced to teamfight, then what you can do is, once you get pretty tanky and if you're ahead, you can play back and forth until you find an opening. So whether it's somebody out of position that you can engage on, or you kind of just like poke and dance around the fight trying to engage it. Since you don't have any hard CC, you can't actually make people commit onto the fight, but you can bait people into being in a bad situation. So as long as you're pressuring the fight back and forth, people will eventually make mistakes, and you can commit on it. What I find really good is going on ADCs if you have a lot of armor in your build, because around mid, slightly late game, before ADCs get lifesteal or penetration, you actually just absolutely destroy them in a 1v1. But versus casters, you do a lot of damage to champions that don't have any resistances or any lifesteal. One of the downsides of Nidalee is that she falls off in teamfights, but if you've done everything properly in around mid-game, your team should actually be ahead enough that you can take pretty much any fight. Disclaimer, I am not responsible for any loss of LP or any banned accounts caused by you playing Nidalee. However, if you want to do it, then good luck out there on the Rift. If you want to say thanks, then feel free to stop by my stream. My name on Twitch right now is RushFrog. Same with Twitter, same with Facebook, because Facebook finally decided to change the page of my name. And also, if you want to join the Discord, then all the links are right here. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and have fun.